Everyone laughed when a poor rancher spent just 50 cents on a week. Sick fool that could barely stand. They said she wouldn't make it through the night. But months later, that same little horse would shock the entire town and change his life forever. Thomas was a poor rancher living on the edge of a small, dusty town. Each day he rose before sunrise to tend his few remaining animals, though the drought had turned his land to dust and his debts kept growing. His fences were broken, the barn nearly empty, and the townsfolk often pitied or mocked him for holding on to a dying dream. Yet, despite the loneliness and endless struggle, Thomas stayed kind-hearted. He still helped neighbors when he could and whispered to his animals, as if they were family. Tired but gentle, he carried on, fueled by a quiet hope that somehow tomorrow might be better. One hot afternoon, Thomas went to the livestock market, hoping to sell a few supplies or buy cheap feed. Among the noise and trading, his eyes caught a small, trembling foal tied near the fence, thin, weak, and barely standing. The auctioneer called for bids, but no one raised a hand. The crowd just laughed, saying the poor thing wouldn't last a week. Something in the foal's sad eyes stirred Thomas's heart. When the bidding dropped to almost nothing, he lifted his hand. 50 cents, he said quietly. The crowd burst into laughter as he walked away with the fragile little foal, unaware that his simple act of kindness would change everything. Back at the ranch, Thomas made a soft bed of hay and old blankets for the fragile foal. She was so weak she could barely lift her head, refusing to eat or move. Each night, Thomas stayed beside her, gently feeding her warm milk by hand, whispering soft words to keep her calm. His neighbors told him it was useless, that the foal wouldn't survive another day, but he wouldn't listen. Exhausted yet determined, he tended to her around the clock, believing she deserved a chance to live. Slowly, the tiny creature began to fight back, her eyes showing the first spark of life. Days passed, and the little foal slowly began to change. One morning, Thomas watched in awe as she struggled to her feet for the first time, letting out a soft, shaky neigh. He smiled and whispered, "That's it, little one. You're stronger than you look." From that day on, he called her Hope. She followed him everywhere, through the fields, to the barn, even when he fixed fences. He talked to her like an old friend, and she'd nudge his shoulder as if she understood every word. For the first time in years, laughter returned to the ranch. Mornings felt brighter, sunsets softer, and the empty land didn't seem so lonely anymore. One cool morning, as the first light touched the fields, Thomas watched Hope run across the pasture with a strength he'd never seen before. Her muscles rippled, her stride smooth and powerful. The weak foal he once carried was now full of life. A neighbor passing by stopped in awe and said, "Thomas, that horse could race." At first, Thomas laughed it off, but the thought stayed with him. After days of hesitation, he decided to enter Hope in a small local race. When word spread, the townsfolk couldn't hide their amusement. "The 50-cent horse? You're wasting your time," they jeered. But Thomas didn't care. He wasn't chasing fame or money. He just wanted to see what Hope could do, and for once, believed that miracles might still happen. The day of the race arrived, and the air buzzed with excitement. Thomas stood by Hope's side at the starting line, his hands trembling slightly. As the crowd whispered about the 50-cent horse, the signal fired, and the gates burst open. Hope stumbled for a second, then surged forward, her hoofs pounding against the dirt like thunder. Thomas's heart raced with every stride. She was smaller, less trained, but her spirit was unmatched. As they rounded the final bend, Hope pushed harder, finishing the race strong, not first, but close enough to make the crowd fall silent. People stared, amazed at the horse they had once mocked. Among them was a well-dressed man, a breeder, who walked up to Thomas afterward, eyes full of interest. "That's some horse you've got there," he said. "She's got real potential." Thomas just smiled, pride shining in his tired eyes. Hope had proven them all wrong. Hope's first race changed everything. What began as small talk around town soon turned into headlines. The Story of a rancher who turned 50 cents into something extraordinary. Thomas started entering Hope into more races, each one bigger than the last. With every run, she grew stronger, faster, and more confident. Crowds began cheering her name, and reporters called Thomas the man who turned 50 cents into gold. The once forgotten ranch came alive again. Fresh paint on the barn, green shoots in the pasture, laughter replacing silence. Fans visited just to see Hope, bringing gifts and letters of admiration. Children would gather near the fence, hoping for a glimpse of the miracle horse who had beaten the odds. During interviews, Thomas always smiled humbly, saying, "She's the real story. Not me, but deep down." He felt something he hadn't in years, pride. The same townspeople who once mocked him now lined the roads waving banners that read, "Go Hope." When he returned from each race, one evening, as the sun dipped low over the fields, Thomas watched Hope graze peacefully and thought about how far they had come. The ranch that had nearly broken him was now thriving. The foal no one wanted had brought life, love, and respect back into his world. It wasn't just about the trophies or fame. It was about believing when no one else did, and watching that faith blossom into something truly beautiful. The big day arrived. Hope stood at the starting line of a national championship, her coat gleaming under the bright lights. The crowd roared as the gates flew open, and she charged forward with power and grace that left even seasoned racers behind. Thomas watched from the sidelines, heart pounding, hands clasped tight. With every stride, memories flooded back, the fragile foal that could barely stand. The long nights he'd stayed awake feeding her. The laughter of those who said she'd never survive. As Hope crossed the finish line first, the stadium erupted in cheers. Thomas stood frozen, unable to speak, tears blurring his vision. Reporters rushed toward him, cameras flashing, shouting questions about the win and the million-dollar offers already pouring in. But Thomas barely heard them. His eyes were fixed on Hope, who looked back at him, calm and proud, as if she understood everything. He wiped his tears and smiled softly. It was never about the money, he whispered. It was about believing when no one else did. In that moment, every hardship, every sleepless night, and every ounce of faith had come full circle. The rancher who once had nothing now had more than he could ever ask for. Not in wealth, but in proof that miracles truly do grow from the smallest acts of kindness. Years passed, and the ranch that once stood quiet was now full of life. Hope had become a legend. Children visited from all over to see the famous horse that turned 50 cents into a miracle. The fences were rebuilt, the barns strong again, and laughter filled the air where silence once lived. Thomas, older now but content, loved telling her story to every young visitor who asked how it all began. He spoke not of money or fame, but of faith, of never giving up when everything seemed lost. Kindness, he'd say, has a way of coming back to you. Hope grazed peacefully nearby, still strong, still gentle, as if she too remembered every step of their journey. As the sun set over the golden fields, Thomas stood by her side, a quiet smile on his face. He gently patted her neck and whispered, "I thought I was saving you for 50 cents, but you ended up saving me 1,000 times over."